I'm excited to show you guys one of my favorite designs this Halloween. So let's get right into it. We're going to be doing a Frankenstein pumpkin. So we're starting with our green outline icing. And I'm just hovering right above my cookie here to get a nice smooth line. If you're too close to your cookie, your line might come out wiggly or not so smooth. So this is a way to get a nice outline. Once this is done, we're going to put it aside to dry for a few moments, and then we're going to go in and flood the sections. So now that my outline has dried, I'm going to fill in the middle section here with some outline consistency. This is my thicker icing again, and this is just to support my icing so it doesn't cave in on itself. Sometimes you get holes or a crater or a kind of dent in your icing, so this helps prevent that. And then I'm going to go around with my flat icing. And I'm just taking my time around the outline, trying to cover it as much as possible. You can always fix things with your scribe if necessary. And I didn't wait for that outline in the middle, that squiggle, to dry. I'm just flooding right over it while it's wet. I prefer this way because a lot of times it can break off sometimes if it's dry. And then it just floats around in your icing and it doesn't make it look nice. So we want a nice smooth finish, and we don't want that to happen, so I don't wait for it to dry. And then we're going to set this aside and let that dry. So it takes about half an hour, 40 minutes, sometimes more, depending on how humid your area is. If you have a fan, that speeds up the process as well. But you want that middle section to dry slightly before you pipe the outside sections. Because if you don't wait, all the flat icing will melt together and you won't have those separations between the sections. So here I'm just trying to push the icing towards the seam. You can see where my tip is and how far the icing is coming that is close to that seam. So with the pressure, I'm making that icing pool out of the tip and push up against itself. And any corners that you can't get into with your tip, then you can just use your scribe to pull the icing into those small sections. And again, I'm using a lot of pressure on my bag. My tip is super close to the cookie, and this will make my icing pool out. And that's where I get that nice clean line. My tip isn't right next to the seam, but I'm pushing that icing as it comes out towards that seam to create a nice smooth line. And I can't get all the way to the top there. I don't want to over flood that section and ruin my nice kind of line going down the middle, so I'll come back there with my scribe. And then I'll just continue flooding here. And then once those sections have crusted over, so they've dried enough for me to pipe on top, they might not be fully dry, I can go ahead with my next design on top. So I'm using my black outline icing, and notice how close I'm staying towards my cookie. I'm not lifting up my bag super high because these are very small lines, so I need control and I need to stay close to my cookie. So I'm not making these massive lines, and when I come down again, that, I'm way over where I'm supposed to be. The top of the head is different. I have lots of space to move around, so I can lift my bag up higher. And just fixing any seams you have with your scribe. Sometimes when you attach the icing, there's a bulge of icing, so I'm just smoothing that out a little bit. And then I'm just going to do the tip here of the pumpkin, which is kind of like his hair as well. And just went in with my outline icing, which is my thicker icing. It's just such a small area. I filled it in with that. And that's no problem, and I can smooth it out easily with my scribe. So while the black outline is drying, we're going to move on to the eyes. So I'm going to grab my white outline consistency, and in one spot with a little wiggle to smooth out the icing as it comes out, we're going to make the eyes. We want to do these details in outline icing because we don't want it to flood and kind of spill over everywhere. We want those eyes to hold their shape and be nice and 3D. So again, if your icing's thick and it doesn't settle too much, you can go in with your scribe to give it a little wiggle and it should be nice and smooth. And then with my black outline icing, I'm just gonna hold it just above, almost inside, but not quite, into the white icing and add a couple of dots for the eyes. I'm gonna make them crazy eyes, but you can make them however you want. And then go in with my scribe to smooth out any tips or any peaks that are left there. And then I'm going to start with his mouth here. So again, I'm just touching down, lifting up, and then touching down at the end again. This is my outline consistency. That's what I use mostly for all the details and, fine lines that I want to hold their shape. And then I'm going to add a little scar here on the side. So notice again, my piping bag is very, very close to my cookie. I'm not lifting it up really high, and that gives me nice control. Especially when you have a curve in a small area, you don't want to get too ahead of yourself. And sometimes your icing doesn't stick well. So you see how I went to go lift up my bag and the icing wasn't stuck. So I just had to make sure I got it down and stuck onto the cookie. And adding one more scar on the other side here as well. And again, just making sure that my icing is nice and stuck to the cookie. These are tiny, tiny lines. So here with my outline consistency, I'm just going to make a tooth. So I'm going to try to make it as square as possible while I'm piping, but if it's not perfect, I can always take my scribe and kind of push out the corners to make it a little bit more square looking. Then I'm going to do the same on the other side here. Again, try to make it a square, keeping my piping bag nice and close, and then fixing it up with my scribe. And then I'm going to go back and flood the hair. So again, this outline has dried now because we were working on the other sections. And normally in an area like this, if it was right on the cookie and I didn't have a layer of icing underneath, I may have put a squiggle in it because it's kind of narrow and it could crater. But the green icing is not fully dry yet. And so another trick to prevent craters is when you're doing the second layer, you do it before the base fully dries. That helps as well to prevent craters, so sometimes you don't need that extra squiggle, but you can always put it there as well if you're worried about it. My flood icing isn't too loose, it's a little bit on the thicker side. When I know I'm doing smaller areas, I won't make my flood too loose, so that also helps with craters. And I'm just going to pull down the icing a little bit here on the corners of the hair. Sometimes you can't get those sharp corners with your bag, so we use our scribe. And there you have it. We have a nice Frankenstein cookie. I think it's such a fun cookie to make and hope you get a chance to make it. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy baking!